the government stands up and says, we are the party of small business, we support small business. And you think they're going to launch into a 10-minute sort of wonderful speech about how good they are for small business. But even that gentleman over there, the MP for Wellington Central, Wairarapa, can only speak for 2.5 minutes on small business. Mr Scott, you're better than that. I know you are. I know you understand the intricacies of business. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. You know, the interesting thing about this is actually all the data, historical data, shows that Labor is better for business. It really does. I had a friend of mine. Who ran a number of businesses, and he said to me, "You know what? The interesting thing is, I know I should be national because I earn so much money." We didn't give in to my campaign, but Labor is so much better for my business. So of course he goes in there and he votes Labor, and we all know this. And Mr Speaker, the thing about this, as Clayton Cosgrove highlighted, is Labor actually came out with a tax package, a tax policy for small business that made them sort of look up and go, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it starts with Labor. Now, to be fair, Mr Woodhouse, I think it was Mr Woodhouse, or it might have been Judith Collins, who's revenue now, I'm not too sure. He did take it and said, well, we do need to do better. But there is it's one of these things, isn't it? They're very good at managerial. Labor comes up with the policy and they take it and they start implementing it, or they come up with a strategy to announce it. So Labor's tax package for small business was actually, I think, a lot more user-friendly. It was around the PAYE. You earn the money, you pay the tax. That's fair, we get that. As Mr Scott did allude to, and as we all know, anyone who has had a small business, provisional tax was like a noose around your neck sometimes. You know, as you mentioned, you have a bad year, and goodness me, you're hit with this tax bill, it means you can't do anything else. And so you have a good year and you're not paying much tax. It just didn't make sense and it wasn't fair. Tax pooling sort of, it smoothed it out a little bit, but basically provisional tax is not the way forward, especially in this day and age of packages like Xero that make small business accounting a hell of a lot easier. But the thing is, Mr Speaker, is the Party for Business has been there for 8 years, and only now are we looking at a tax package that's going to help small businesses. Whereas Labor was going to implement our business tax package within the first 100 days. In fact, we probably still will. Because the way things are going, Mr Speaker, I doubt we'll get to the third reading of this bill before the election. But 8 years, and the MPs must have had constituents come to them and say, can you do something about provisional tax? 97% of New Zealand businesses, Mr Speaker, are classed as small to medium enterprises. That is, they employ 19 people or less. 99% of New Zealand businesses employ 50 people or less. This is a major problem for business, and it's taken us 8 years to get here. And I personally do not think that is good enough, Mr Speaker. That is not good enough from the party that purports to represent business, because they don't. They just don't. Mr Speaker, the other thing that has taken too long here, and that is the foreign trust debacle. Now, this has been well played out in the media, but it's worth just going over it a little bit again. So, we all know in politics, whether it's local, national or even global, that perception is the reality. Now, Mr Speaker, whether we were a tax haven or not, it didn't really matter. And the reason I say that is because in the Australian Financial Times, in The Guardian and all these reputable international newspapers, it reported New Zealand being a tax haven. So that became the reality, Mr Speaker. Now, for me, let's be very generous here, which I'm going to make an assumption which is completely false, but let's make an assumption here that the government didn't know about this. Well, you would think when New Zealand's global brand was under attack from reputable newspapers in the financial hubs around the world, we would have done something about this immediately. And yet I believe what the government did in this case is what it does with a number of issues. It buries its head in the sand and hopes it'll go away. Why are we only having the second reading of this bill now when it was such a major issue. When our global brand, Mr. Speaker, and those of us who have worked overseas, we know what our brand stands for. We know what being a Kiwi means. It means acting with integrity. It means trustworthy. It means working hard. Every young Kiwi that goes to London ends up with a job if they want one because we have a reputation for being good people. And what this trust debacle did, Mr. Speaker, is it just began to chip away at that reputation of Kiwis being businessmen and women of integrity. And so the government launched a report, probably a wise thing to do. Well, not a report, an inquiry. Had to be done. And what this inquiry said was the rules are not good enough. What the inquiry said, Mr. Speaker, is there needs to be a much higher level of transparency so not only New Zealanders, but the global environment, the global business sector can have confidence that when they invest in New Zealand, when they deal with New Zealand businesses, when they're having dealings with New Zealand businessmen and women, they know that they are dealing with people of integrity. Because the last thing we need, Mr. Speaker, is to be known overseas as a dodgy company or a dodgy place to do business. Part of the problem, Mr. Speaker, with this bill is that there is going to be more information, but that is not going to be made available to the public. Now, of course, there is a risk with this. If all the information is made available to the public, then for whatever reason someone has a foreign trust set up in New Zealand, and it might be because of the safety of their family, etc., it could compromise them. But the thing is, with transparency, is it's about letting New Zealanders know what is going on in our country. And I would have thought that if we haven't somewhere where New Zealanders can take a look at this and understand, or even a report somewhere that New Zealanders can access and understand that we are in fact acting with integrity, that the government has our back, so to speak, then we haven't met the requirements of where we need to be, Mr. Speaker. Now, I don't know if there were dodgy guys, drug dealers and murderers and money launderers investing in our foreign trusts. It was hard to tell. There was so much information out there. But if there was, Mr. Speaker, then that's really bad. And if there was, Mr. Speaker, we need to close that down completely so people do know they can invest and deal with New Zealanders in confidence. So that's why I'm a little bit concerned that we haven't gone as far as we need to. Barry Coates talked about, evasion and avoidance. Well, there is a big difference. Evasion's illegal, avoidance isn't. But, Mr. Speaker, if we look at our tax base at the moment, there are estimates between $500 million, which is very conservative, through to $7 billion, which I think is probably too high, but it's a figure that's out there, of avoidance. So this is legal. This is largely big companies structuring their affairs so they don't have to pay their fair share of tax. Now, initially when this came out, Mr. Speaker, the Minister said there's not a problem here. Nothing to see, move on. The Prime Minister actually then came out and said, well, we do have a problem. This is not illegal, but it's immoral. And I suspect, Mr. Speaker, this is why we have a new revenue spokesperson at the moment, because the old revenue spokesperson just could not get his head around these issues. And they are complex. There's no doubt about this. I mean, the number of tax bills before FEC in the last 24 months and the number of tax bills coming before FEC is huge. And the reason for that is these are complex and it does require quite a degree of consultation, but it doesn't mean that just because it's hard to do, it doesn't mean we don't do it. And I just find, Mr. Speaker, disappointingly, that what this government seems to think is, well, it is hard, let's bury our head in the sand. But we just can't do that, Mr. Speaker. And I think what the people of New Zealand are looking for are leadership. And I think that Mr. Key failed to provide leadership in this area, and almost, well, no, not almost, but by association, as did Mr. English, who of course was his finance minister for 8 years. If Mr. English had been concerned about the level of base erosion profit shifting or legal avoidance, then he himself, as the Minister of Finance, could have done something about it. But he just didn't show leadership, Mr. Speaker. And what it took is Labour and admittedly the Greens to come out, and New Zealand First, because we all went hard on this issue, to say there is something wrong here. And Mr. Speaker, I just think when it comes to this sort of behaviour, New Zealanders demand leadership and they demand action. Waiting so long for this sort of legislation is just not good enough. Thank you very much.